Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, neither new ships nor good news have come out of Avondale's mothballed riverfront facilities lately. And while we are not likely to see the former, we did hear the latter this week with announcement of an agreement to build a multi-purpose, job-producing, economy-boosting industry on the West Bank. Meanwhile, on the East Bank, on another waterway, another facility prepares to reopen. We'll look at the story behind Deutsches Haus and its new home on Bayou St. John. We'll also examine a legislative auditor's report on jazz trumpeter Irvin Mayfield's finances, and a former top aide to Mayor Ray Nagin offers his mea culpa. Our Future Watch segment looks at the latest from the Audit Institute, and will examine hard times in the French bread industry. At our table tonight are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; David Hammer, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4; Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter; and Ian McNulty, food writer, The New Orleans Advocate. And we're going to go over to Errol first, because big announcement about what's going to happen with the former Avondale site.
Yeah, when this whole project comes together, it is projected that it'll have 2,000 employees, which is wonderful, except during Avondale's golden era in the 1940s, it had 26,000 employees. There was a time it was the biggest employer in the state. And one thing it used to build in the during the World War II era is it built battleships, and so it was one of the largest developers of that. You will not see ships of any type being built at the new Avondale facility, but what you have, though, is a place that has a long stretch of deep river water, and then it has something like 6 railroad tracks, and then lots of buildings and cranes and that sort of thing. So what happened yesterday is that these two companies, one's called T. Parker Hose, which is out of Virginia, and the other out of Illinois, called Hillco Redevelopment. They got together and they purchased from Huntington Ingalls the Avondale property. It's 234 acres. And the idea is to develop something, and the word that they use is value added, okay? And so that something can come in by ship, and instead of just, sending it somewhere else, they can take it out, send it somewhere, and do something to it that is part of the manufacturing process. For example, if a load of coffee beans comes in, they can take it out and go and roast the beans, and then take it somewhere else and put them all in sacks. And so the value of the product has been added. So they'll have this facility, and this whole concept, what they call the intermodal concept, where you have the boats and you have the railroads and all that, allow this sort of thing. There's not a lot of manufacturing in the New Orleans area. So this will be one of the few places that once it's all together, that you're going to see manufacturing of different types all together, and the big attraction is it's going to be so transportation friendly. So it's a good story in that it's so many agencies work together. The Jefferson Parish Economic Development Unit and took a lot of the lead in it, and so the GNO Inc. And there are a lot of companies, or there are a lot of government entities that had jurisdictions in this. Jefferson Parish, the state, some municipalities. So they had to get the approval of all these people, not to mention raising all the money. But yesterday, it finally all came together. They said, okay, we got everybody's approval, we've raised the money, let's sign everything. And so now the project is on the way. So it's going to be a big thing, because that area of the West Bank is pretty blighted. There's not a lot of activity there. One person was quoted in the paper saying there's no restaurants, there's no place to eat around here. And so this is going to allow some good economic stimulus for the West Bank.
Well, it's been for years a sort of lying fallow. There's this really valuable land.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's 8,000 feet along the riverfront. I mean, that is prime real estate. So it's really good to see that action has been taken now to get some business going there.
But I think it's this multimodal concept and this value-added concept that makes it worthwhile for the investors. I mean, there's a lot of places where you can just park a ship and unload, but when you can do more things with it and increase the value, I think that makes it really attractive.
Okay, we're glad to see it. Thanks, Eve. Going over to David now, and then more follow-up on a story that you broke actually a few years ago, and this is regarding Irvin Mayfield, the jazz orchestra, the jazz market, and private donations, but also some revelations of some public funds too.
Well, and you point out the fact that this is something that I broke back in May of 2015, and here we have a legislative audit. Usually what you see is, and Irvin Mayfield and his partner Ronald Markham were indicted federal charges in December of last year. So usually you see a legislative audit that starts a process of investigation. Here you have the audit coming in after, I've done umpteen stories and there's been a federal investigation and charges filed. And actually, both Mr. Mayfield and Markham have said that they
Ronald
question
Markham,
the timing,
yeah.
exactly, of this as almost like the state auditor being used as an agent of the federal government's prosecution against them. Now, one thing, though, to point out is that the details that came out in this audit do move the ball forward a little bit from some of the things that I'd reported and that appear in the indictment. They, I talked about these hotel stays that Irvin Mayfield used Library Foundation money to pay for. Going to the Ritz-Carlton in New York and spending $18,000 in one 5-day visit and $1,400 on a breakfast, and that made big headlines. The thing that came out in the audit is that he was doing this on a regular basis, and he had actually had NoJo, the jazz orchestra that he founded, which is a nonprofit that received public funds, spend $144,000 on stays at the Four Seasons and the Ritz-Carlton. And that was where he had contracts to play venues, and the venue was supposed to pay for him to stay at a 5-star hotel. But sometimes they didn't pay, and he'd just have the jazz orchestra pay with, according to the audit, public funds that they'd received. Also, there was a chart that they had in the audit that showed all of these very expensive stays at 5-star hotels for Mr. Mayfield, and then his band members staying at the Hampton Inn and these
not
other
quite the same
budget exactly for the
accommodations.
same exact trip.
Hey, it's free breakfast at the Hampton Inn.
That's right. That's true.
Not $1,400, exactly. And then there were other sources of funds. The Wisner Grant, which was a grant controlled by the city of New Orleans that Mayor Ray Nagin gave to the jazz orchestra to just handle as a pass-through to pay sculpture artists for the sculpture garden at Armstrong Park. Well, it turns out, according to the audit, that that money was diverted to pay their expenses, including their 6-figure salaries for Mayfield.
Because their
and Markham.
payroll fund was just about depleted at
Exactly.
that
That when the transfers were made, the auditor showed that they were this close to going into the red, and that saved them. And then they would front the money using that the grant, and then backfill it later on
So
with
they-
money, including from the Library Foundation.
So they would, like you say, they'd put the money back, but it was with monies that were maybe intended for something else? Is that the issue there?
Exactly. And then the other issue is state money from taxpayers, state capital outlay funds, and local grants totaling more than $2 million, where they had requirements to use that money to build the jazz market over on O.C. Haley in Central City. The auditor says that they used it on other things, including the operating expenses to pay their salaries and on these trips and other personal expenses.
So what's the legal status here? Like you say, they are under indictment.
Right.
What-
Well, they actually were scheduled to go to trial this month, but that got pushed back. A lot of kind of wrangling and not much progress in terms of disclosure of exchange of information that has to go on in the pretrial process. So the trial got pushed back to April 29th.
Well, the defense attorneys say they're not getting some of these documents, right?
Well, one of the things that they were fighting about for months was their access to the work papers behind this audit. That has now apparently, according to the court records, has been turned over or is in the process of being turned over through that process.
So both Mayfield and Markham have entered pleas of not guilty.
Correct. They both have pled not guilty, and so far they've been fighting very hard.
Has any of the money, particularly in your first reports, we heard that the money was going to be put back into the Library Foundation. Is anything to pay back?
Yes. There have been 2 payments of $96,000 each, whatever that works out, close to $200,000 out of $450,000 or so that the jazz orchestra agreed to pay back after my stories came out. There was over $1 million in transfers that So there's a balance of about $600 and something thousand that they said they wouldn't pay directly, but that they would pay back through benefit concerts. As of now, I don't believe any of those benefit concerts have been held.
All right, David, thanks. The story keeps on going.
Yes.
All right, thanks a lot. Ian, over to you. A fun story to talk about right now. Deutsches Haus, in their new digs, they had Oktoberfest there last year, and Oktoberfest is now underway from starting this weekend again on the Bayou. Beautiful spot.
Yeah, big times for Deutsches Haus. Of course, a lot of people think about Oktoberfest this time of year. It doesn't feel like it outside, but it is October. It is fall. It's still good beer drinking weather. That's good to hear. But yes, Oktoberfest is the main project of Deutsches Haus, which of course is this cultural organization that goes back for a long time. In fact, this year is the 90th anniversary of the formation of Deutsches Haus in New Orleans. So it's a big year for them in that regard. People go to Oktoberfest this year. If you go to the festival, the party, you'll see in the background their new house, the Deutsches Haus itself. And it's been a long journey to get here. A lot of long-time New Orleans people will remember that Deutsches Haus was in Mid-City on Galvez Street for a long time. Well, the club lost that to Katrina, rebuilt it with their own hands, then lost it again when the state took it, when it razed that entire neighborhood to make way for the hospital complexes there. The current site of Deutsches Haus is now a parking lot, so it shows you the highest and best use for that particular property. But the club itself persevered. You know, they've kept themselves together in temporary locations. They held their Oktoberfest every year out in Kenner until last year, as you said. They come back to Bayou St. John through all the ordeal of moving around and having the property taken. They were able to negotiate a deal to get this parcel of land on Bayou St. John, where they've built now the new Deutsches Haus itself and where they're holding Oktoberfest. And I think this is going to have long-term benefits for people in the club, certainly. The club is now booming. It's doubled its membership since the dark days when they lost their clubhouse in Mid-City. But also just for people who enjoy going out in New Orleans and seeing, significant places. Think about Bayou St. John. You've got City Park over there. You've got, the park areas that line Bayou St. John. You have a lot of festivals that happen. But is there really a place where you can go and open to the public and just, have an accommodation and enjoy a view of Bayou St. John? Well, that's what Deutsches Haus will be. Once Oktoberfest has run its course, and it goes on for the next 3 weekends, the club itself will get into the nitty-gritty of finalizing their facility, their house. And then in mid to late November, they'll open it to the public. And just like Deutsches Haus in the past, it's a membership-based organization, but the clubhouse is open to the public. They rent it out for events. You can drop by and have a beer. And I've gotten a tour of this future Deutsches Haus that's about to open there that people will see when they go down to the bayou, and it's magnificent. It has this alpine look, this tall peaked roof. You walk inside, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful room. That's their main hall for events and such. Next to it, a long bar, 20 drafts, all German beers, a second bar that will always be open to the public and the members when somebody's having a wedding or an event in Deutsches Haus itself. So, and also food, German food. They're going to be cooking that up there every day.
So here's the question, Ian. With them holding Oktoberfest outside and German beer, is it going to be cold? Because if you're in Germany, the beer is not cold and it's not hot outside, but here it is.
Sometimes really enjoying a beer can transport you, David. And if the first one doesn't, try again.
And then they know how to serve cold beer. I mean, you talk about their building. You just can imagine a wonderful beer hall with steins lined up and down a table.
And the important thing is, this is more than just a bar or a restaurant or an event hall opening up. This is a cultural organization.
Yes, it is.
Losing that clubhouse was a blow to this organization that has, like we said, 90 years of history. You can imagine if Rex lost its den on Claiborne Avenue, if Zulu lost their headquarters on Broad Street. This would be comparable to what Deutsches Haus went through for all those years. But they're back, and having this place that's open to the public, a place that people can go, that's family friendly. You can bring your kids. Like I said, you don't have to be a member. They certainly would like you to be a member, but you can go. It's open to the public, and it's going to be a nice amenity, I think, for people to enjoy Bayou St. John, which is really having a rejuvenation these days. People use using
Yeah,
it. You see
such a
more people
beautiful
than ever
spot.
on the water, which is really nice.
Yeah, I bet they still do the chicken dance too.
Many
Of
renditions.
course.
And don't worry, if you missed the first one, they'll do it again.
Beer stein holding
Beer
competition.
stein holding competition. Although I find those steins are a lot easier to hold if you're drinking the beer, though. I don't understand why they just don't take a little
hold
off the
it out
top.
and that's it.
Just it gets easier and easier.
Some of the architectural features from the Mid-City facility, they were able to move over to the new place?
Yes, yeah. The building itself is brand new from the ground up, but they've imbued it with many details from the old place. Some of the lumber that was salvaged from the old Galvez Street Hall is there. Back in the old days, there was a bowling alley in the old Galvez Street Hall. Well, some of that's been turned into a bar top. Little details all around it. It's a really fascinating place. Even people who remember Cobb's, the old German restaurant, some of the wine cask heads from that restaurant made their way into the hands of Deutsches
Terrific.
Haus are on display.
All right, it sounds like fun. Thanks a lot, Ian. Over to Don. Some other fun, too. Audubon Institute and the stuff they provide for us.
The lions are coming. That's their biggest news, which long awaited. There haven't been lions on display since 2013 when the male named Bubba died of cancer and the female named Cassie was transferred to the West Bank for geriatric care. In that time, Boise and Joy Bollinger made the largest ever single donation to the Audubon Institute, $5 million to pay for the new lion facility, or most of the new lion facility. It should be complete sometime next year, hoping for spring. It's kind of totally different from the exhibit that was there before. It will look like African grasslands. You'll enter really through a replica of an abandoned 1920s train station to highlight the fact that this railroad through Africa is really what spawned the poaching and the species loss of lions over time, and instead the train cars will be used as educational areas and places for demonstrations. More than 450,000 lions lived in the wild in the 1940s. They're down to 20,000 today in the wild. New Orleans Zoo will be a place where they are hoping to breed new African lions. There will be 3 females coming in from the Peoria Zoo and only 1 male from a zoo at a place called Safari West. But they'll all be part of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums Species Survival Program, which controls breeding of all of these kind of animals across our nation. So that should open again, open for new lions again at the zoo sometime in 2019.
I think that 1-to-3 ratio is pretty much true in the wild also.
It might be.
The males have a harem, they're just,
Well, they are king of the jungle.
There you go.
So they're hoping that this male lion will be the breeding king in New Orleans. Also, big news there, that Jaguar Valerio will be back on display in his newly rehabilitated unit sometime in the next few weeks. That was a terrible incident over the summer where Valerio chewed through the roof. The roof has been totally reconstructed with even heavier steel and materials, even though his facility was completely acceptable according to accreditation standards. Something went
managed
terribly.
to escape from
He
it,
managed to escape. In the meantime, the female jaguar they had has died of an illness, so just Valerio will be back on display. When he got out, he killed off all the alpaca the zoo had. They're getting 6 new alpacas from a facility in Texas in a month or so. So jaguars, alpacas, and lions, oh my, are all coming back to the zoo. In other Audubon news, the insectarium turned 10 this year. This kind of crazy, zany facility with the goal of making bugs not something we fear, but instead are fascinated by.
And also can dine on.
Yeah. Go with your grandchildren. They'll make you eat bugs. I make my parents eat bugs when my children take them there. But they really are doing good things there. They've seen 156,000 guests through September this year. They sell it as part of a whole package deal to tourists. Go to the zoo, go to the aquarium, and go to the insectarium. And they found that really works. You know, I have a ticket. Oh, I might as well try this bug place out. And then people end up fascinated by it. And in aquarium news, real quick, they're getting a new shark touch pool next year. So you'll be able to go actually touch sharks. And they have a giant great white shark on display right now, not a live one. It's part of the Washed Ashore exhibit, which is 10-foot and larger sculptures made of plastic that is found in our waterways.
Wonderful. Listening to the both of you, my grandkids are going to be in town next week. There's so many things to do. They're going to have a wonderful time. Thanks a lot. Over to David now. Greg Mefford.
As my stories go, this is kind of on the fun side.
Well, yeah. He wrote a book, and
Yeah.
you interviewed him about it, and he sort of offers his mea culpa and very just sort of bears his heart and soul.
Yeah, just to remind people, this is Greg Mefford. Was before Mitch Landrieu made a slew of deputy mayors. There was never a deputy mayor in New Orleans until Greg Mefford claimed to be self-proclaimed deputy mayor to Mayor Ray Nagin. And he was the IT guy, and he was kind of the germination of the corruption scandal with Ray Nagin. And he was Nagin's fixer, and if you may recall, he got a credit card from one of the vendors who was a buddy of his who was supplying the IT services, and he used that credit card to send Nagin and himself and their families to Hawaii and Jamaica, and things kind of spawned from there. And this book, his book is called Landfall, and it came out actually on the anniversary of Katrina. And it's not really about Katrina. There's some sections about it because he was part of the key team that responded to Katrina and was holed up here and trying to get things back up and running. But a lot of it was really fascinating because he, was very introspective, and he talked about the crush he had, the man crush or whatever that he had on Ray Nagin, and how he really wanted to, he wanted to impress him. And so he made himself seem richer than he really was, made himself seem more important than he really was. And he also brings out in this book something that, he testified against Ray Nagin in court in his criminal trial and was the key witness, one of the key witnesses against him, and said that he was guilty then. But this is the first time he's really doing it in his own words. Mm-hmm. And he was saying that this was something that they devised from the beginning, long before Katrina, debunking this idea that Nagin was this good crusader for good government and then went crazy in Katrina and then turned into this crook. No. They had this idea that, hey, we deserve to make money, we deserve to get out of this more than what we've been given, and we used to be making $400,000 a year, and now we're only making $150,000. Poor us. We got to make this work for us.
And because of that, he served how many months?
He served 30 months in prison, so almost 3 years, and he said that prison changed him, and he realized just how wrong he was and how he had, altered the process to benefit himself.
And he wrote this book, he said, as sort of a love letter to New Orleans?
Yeah, I mean, he there's still some things that are questionable that I had to kind of challenge him on, and actually Gordon Russell at the New Orleans Advocate, who worked with me on investigating this at the Times-Picayune at the time, also did a story, and we questioned some of his comments and his leanings, but he says that, and he does talk a lot about how he came to love the city and really wanted to do good for the city.
And so we can find the interview with him on
www.tv.com. It goes back a few weeks now, but also, Landfall, I was able to find it on Amazon.
But the interview is an interesting interview.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot, David. All right. Over to Ian. Okay, now this is something that I'm sure just struck fear in the hearts of a lot of New Orleanians. Binder is out of business. That's French bread. I mean, we do not want to see French bread in danger.
Right. Well, French bread is, what is it? It's the foundation for po' boys. It's the foundation for a lot of dishes that we rely on in our traditional New Orleans restaurants. But it's a humble role. It just sort of, it's in the background. That was a pun. That was on purpose. It's something that can be easily taken for granted. Well, recently, the system got a jolt when one of the old line bakeries shut down, Alois J. Binder Bakery in the Marigny. We don't know the future of the business. They're not talking, the family owners of the place, but it shut down. They abruptly stopped deliveries and production, and everyone who worked there no longer works there. Many of them now work for other bakeries. But it revealed, when you take a look at it, well, Binder has closed. What's left? What's left is Leidenheimer, by far the largest bakery in New Orleans, and then John Genduza Bakery, a much smaller producer. Both of them produce the traditional New Orleans po' boy loaf, that long, yard-long loaf that you can cut into many sandwiches and shipped around in golf bag-sized paper sacks. I mean, this is just part of the landscape of restaurants and dining in New Orleans. There are other producers for French bread in New Orleans, but if you're running a restaurant or a po' boy shop and you need that delivered delivered to you every day, and on Sunday you need a place like one of these that's going to do it. And it revealed this narrowing base for something that's a really big part of the New Orleans food culture.
And it's something that just simply can't go away. But for Binder, do you think it's a chance that they will come back?
You know, there's always that chance, although there's been no sound out of Binder Bakery. The facility itself appears to be shut down. The flashing sign outside is gone. The other bakeries tell me they've been getting more orders. They picked up a little bit of business from that. But I think really there's going to be a boost in awareness out of this that this is a very unique piece of the food culture of New Orleans. They don't make French bread like this anywhere else. They wouldn't certainly call it French bread.
They can't
either.
replicate it.
The
They really can't.
Vietnamese, though, are making a bread.
Don Fong.
Fong, yes, and they've had an uptick in orders
Which
too.
is a really good bread.
It's terrific,
Okay.
but it is not the same.
But I would argue, though, that the Vietnamese learned French cooking techniques. That was once a French colony. That probably the Vietnamese French bread is closer to being French bread than our
the New
other
Orleans
French
bread.
bread, which is German.
Is our French bread really French bread?
It
I mean,
is
there are all
not.
these German names in there.
We shouldn't get caught up in terminology. The French bread of New Orleans that goes into our po' boys was in the hands of Italian and German bakers for basically its entire history. Professor, the late Michael Mazel, made a great argument that it's really much closer to this loaf that's very common around Austria, and that's the type of bread that it evolved
wouldn't be a
from.
French name,
Right,
too.
but anybody who appreciates
Binder,
New Orleans po'
rising,
boys, you know that it's that texture of it, the
Right.
crust, the interior. It's nothing whatsoever to do with a French baguette, but everything to do with a po' boy. So distinctive to that. Some others have stepped up. The Vietnamese style bakeries definitely do produce a very similar bread, but it's not that long po' boy loaf with that precise texture that people know as soon as they put it in their mouth.
No, and we cannot have that as an ain't there no more. You know, French bread has got to stay. The French bread loaves that we know.
Well, it's
So
in our
we wish
hands,
them
so
all
go
luck.
have a po' boy if you
All
feel
right,
that
I
way.
think we will tonight. All right, time toward looking ahead.
The New Orleans wine and food experience has been going through several changes lately, and the latest was announced this week. It used to always be in late May, and they've moved it to early April, April 3rd through 7th. So April, you can have Nalfi, you can have the French Quarter Festival, you have the Jazz
the Jazz
Fest,
Fest.
and on and on. April's going to be a big month.
Beware, though, it is falling during Lent. So if abstinence from alcohol is one of your vows, you can
Start rethinking
watch
right
out,
now,
yes.
David.
Well, we think of New Orleans as the political capital, the place where the politics is rough and tumble most. I defy anybody to find a place more rough and tumble in their politics than Plaquemines Parish. And I'll have a story coming out next week about that and how it's really reached a fever pitch these
Tough
days.
presidential race down there?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. All right.
Back to the zoo. It's not immediately out there, but November 23rd, Zoo Lights opens for the first time ever. It's going to be a wildlife holiday wonderland of lit up displays, open every day from 5:30 to 9:30 at the zoo.
It's going to be beautiful. Thanks. Ian.
Sort of an ongoing thing that we touched on is just New Orleans food. You know, we every once in a while we get these shocks to the system that something we love maybe changing or going away. Dante's Kitchen restaurant just closed last week. A lot of people were anguished. If you have your favorite New Orleans restaurants, favorite New Orleans dishes, it's in your hands to make sure they stay healthy.
All
So
right.
go enjoy.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.